Beautiful. So I've got 10:02 this morning. So I want to go ahead and get started. And I'm really excited today. This is like a big deal on so many levels for us. It's super fun. We've never done a three-part webinar series. So this is part one, and we'll talk about what the other parts are here in a moment. But that's pretty fun and exciting and new. Obviously, this topic is super popular right now, the idea of work from home and what that looks like, and then the idea that work from home might be here to stay, which is even perhaps more intriguing, is all the things that our clients our clients are asking about, we're getting questions about. So we wanted to take advantage of that opportunity to, bring up some of the topics that we think you need to be thinking about and addressing as we maybe transition to more permanent remote work. And that's sort of the goal or the message of today. And so this is the first part of our webinar series, and it is going to focus on self-assessment. So how do we, get employees to evaluate their workstations? What do we do with that information? How do we use that to our advantage in injury prevention? Because that's ultimately the goal, is that we assess it and then we make change. And so how do we do that or make that transition so all these pieces work together? We are after this webinar, there are two more in this series. So I've got them listed up there online on the screen right now. You should be able to see that. The next series, part of this series, is on ergonomic setup standards. This is really where we talk about equipment. And I would say that is probably the number one question we get, and the number one thing people are challenged by is, how do I provide equipment? What am I required to provide? What does my staff really need? I have offices at work already. What if I'm also sending them home? Do I need to provide two of everything for everyone? And so there's some questions around that. And I think those are sort of good and valid questions, and one of the key stumbling blocks for a lot of organizations. So we are going to tackle that in next month's webinar, which is coming up on March the 25th. It is already posted online. All of these are online already. So if you have not yet registered for webinar number 2, I would suggest you do that. And then we've got webinar number 3 coming up at the end of April. And that is going to be talking about education. And so I don't think that education is not going to come up in the first couple ones, but we're really going to dive into that topic in more detail in that third part of this series. How do we educate staff, and how do we do that effectively so that we're really getting some good setup happening at home with hopefully the right equipment in place, some self-assessment tools built in there, and then the education piece as well. So that's what's coming from us in the next several months, and we're very excited about it. So I hope that you are able to join us for several of these webinars. If you cannot make, for some reason, the March or the April webinar, you got a conflict in your schedule, please register anyways if you're interested in the content. What happens when you register is that after the webinar is over, we're recording all of these. And so we will send you a link to the recording. So that way you get the link straight up front. You don't have to go hunting around or emailing for us. Just let us know by registering that you are interested, and we will send you the link after the fact. I know there were at least 5 or 10 people registered for today's webinar, for example, who were not able to attend. They had emailed me a couple weeks ago to say, hey, I can't come, but I really want the info. And we just say register, and then you'll get the link later. And that's the simplest way to tackle that. So that is all coming in the next couple months as part of this 3-part webinar series. So without any further ado, let's talk about what we're here for today, which is self-assessment. And so what I want to highlight here is sort of our plan for the day. It's not really incredibly detailed here. I've sort of tried to simplify it, but we're going to talk about briefly what is the type of worker that we're referring to, because the next 3-part series is really focused on a very specific type of worker for you moving forwards, right? And what this worker is doing and how often they're in the office. And that's really where that sort of piece is coming from. So we'll just make sure that we're all on the same page of what types of workers we're really referring to here. And then we're going to move on talking about a couple different pieces, which is just the basics of what work from home, what's happening, what trends we're seeing, what does staff want, what are the reports coming out that's suggesting, from polls and research that's being done, what are your employees looking for? And then we'll spend the sort of back end of this talking about work from home and ultimately diving into that big chunk at the end there, that self-assessment piece. So the first thing I want to highlight today is that we really have 2 different types of employees at the moment. I think a lot of organizations, in fact, in Ontario, pretty much every organization that wasn't deemed essential, like a manufacturer or hospital, and even those folks sent some staff home, is that many organizations still have employees working at home on a temporary basis, right? So we sent people home at the end of March last year, and maybe they've been back to the office a couple times, depending on what the restrictions look like and what your office was able to do in terms of opening up in your area. But ultimately, we've been treating these employees as temporary work from home employees. That there was never any intention, or is there any intention for them to stay at home? That once the office reopens, that all these people are going back to work. And so my office reopens, 300 people are rolling through the door on day one or over the span of several weeks as we navigate the new normal, which is, social distancing in the office and all the other things that are happening as we wait for, widespread COVID vaccine to be released. So that is our temporary worker. But the expectation here with that group is that eventually they will be going back to the office by X date, right? So by January, 1st, 2022, scary to think about that it might be that far away, right? But January 1st, 2022, everybody will be back in the office. And that's what that's going to look like for us. And so there's that type of worker that we've got. They're still temporary, no intention of having them at home full time or in any capacity. And there's various reasons for that. Number one is your workplace might deem that it's really not appropriate to have them at home, that maybe they're a public-facing employee. Think of our municipal world. All of our municipalities, their main head offices have been closed. Yet, when they are open, there are a lot of employees there that are public-facing, that need to be able to interact with the public on a day-to-day basis, and people who come to the office to speak or meet with them, pay bills, etc. All that stuff is public-facing and needs to continue, so this employee will not be able to work from home. Okay, there are always going to be employees like that they need to go back to work when the building is open again. And that is just the normal and the sort of nature of this. What we're focusing on in our 3-part webinar series is more getting prepared for the permanent remote work. And so some of our workers will not be coming back to work, or at least not coming back to work full time, right? That's really what we're looking for, is that this worker group is probably looking at least part-time at home. So we have decided or evaluated, and we've decided that we're going to be able to send staff back, bring staff back maybe 3 days a week, and we're going to be able to let them work from home 2 days a week. Or these are staff that don't need to be here at all, right? We've decided that they can all work remotely. I just talked to a client in that boat the other day. They have an entire sales team, and they said, you know what, they never need to be in the office, right? And once in a blue moon, we need that, maybe need them in the office for a meeting or a training session. But even most of that's been online for the last several months. And so, I don't think we're ever going to need them back. And so there's no reason for them to come back to the office. We're going to continue having them work from home. And there's lots of reasons why organizations are choosing this and finding this to their advantage. But certainly, I think the landscape in workplaces across North America, for sure, I think the world in general, is probably that we are looking at a lot more of these type of workers than we're used to. Right? Typically, work has occurred 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in the office. And there were some organizations that offered remote work as part of their arrangement or their flexible work plans, but those were few and far between. And we're seeing a drastic shift in this, going towards people who are workplaces that are looking at this being a serious option for a significant, if not entire staff, a significant number of staff, if not an entire staff or an entire workplace. There is not going to be a head office anymore. Everybody will be working from home. And so this is really what the group that we are talking about, right? We're really focused on this group that is likely moving forwards, going to be working from home at least part-time regularly, right? So not just like part-time, like once in a blue moon, I go home and I've got a contractor on site, and that's who, I choose to take this Thursday so that I can be there when my contractor's there. We're talking about people who every Thursday and Friday for the foreseeable future have decided and created a work arrangement where they will be at home. So I wanted to take a second and ask and sort of poll the audience here and see what is going on with your workforce. So my question here is, people from my workplace will be working from home after COVID restrictions have been lifted. And the answers are no, I don't foresee that. Yes, at least part-time, or yes, full-time. And you can check as many boxes as you want. So if you have people that are going to be part-time and full-time, feel free to check both boxes as well. So that poll should be all over your screen right now. It takes over your screen temporarily here. Okay, we've got a little mix here. Lots of folks saying yes, at least part-time in the office, part-time at home. And I do envision that being more and more of the stuff that we're going to see. Awesome. More than 70% of you have voted, more than 75%. I'll give it another 10 or seconds or so, and then I'm going to close that out. Up to over 80. That's fabulous. And the vast majority of you are telling me that at least part-time, some of your staff are going to be working from home. So those numbers look like 80%, 86% of you said yes, at least part-time in my office. I will have staff that are part-time in the office, part-time at home. 26% of you said yes, I will have some staff that are full-time at home. So that's an interesting combination, right? We looking at 26% of the folks online with us today are saying at least some of my staff will be at home full-time, if not everyone. And that is the message we're seeing across sort of the board here. So I think this is sort of question speaks to exactly what we've just said here is once we are no longer required to work from home, because that is effectively have been where we're at, right? Is that we're required to work from home over the last several months or, better part of a year at this point. Will we go back? And just as importantly, I think the secondary question of that is, do we want to? And the answer might be no, right? The answer might be that we don't want to. And we don't want to from an employee perspective, and you may not want to from an employer perspective. Right. From an employee perspective, we're seeing all kinds of benefits, and I'm going to highlight those in the coming slides as well, what our staff are finding are beneficial about working from home. And then we also see the benefits from the employer side. And so that's something that has been can't really be understated, I don't think. Oh, I just got a question here. So this individual is saying they anticipate about 35% of the staff full-time and another 15 to 20% doing part-time. And I think that's pretty normal. We're going to see a lot more of that, where there's a lot of flexibility in how work is occurring at our workplaces. So I appreciate the share. Thank you so much. So when we look at this, I think the benefits and the drawbacks, we'll talk about employee, what they like and what they want moving forwards here. But I think there are some key pieces from an employer perspective that we need to discuss, because this is why I think there's some motivation. You're hearing from your staff that they want this, that they've been successful at home. You've proven to everybody that you can do it because you've been doing it for months and being successful, right? Navigating, how do we have meetings online? How do we do collaborative work online? You've been doing it and it's been going well for a lot of organizations. So I think there's sort of this boost that, okay, we can do this, right? This confidence that where before we were feeling like this is impossible, it's not practical for our workplace, we feel that it is. And we can see that it is because we've been doing that, right? Which is great. From an employer perspective, there are some other benefits here that I think is motivating some of the changes that we're seeing. Number one, I think it opens up a much larger selection pool, right? This is an interesting factor, and one my family's going through right now. My husband's been out of work since COVID started and has been job searching. And this is an interesting factor that he's seeing a lot more in some of the job postings that are up online, that people are or organizations are leveraging this as a marketing tool to get great applicants into their positions, right? They're saying this is going to be a work from home position. Well, I could be in any province I want to and work for an organization in Toronto if I have the right skill set and I'm able to work from home full time, right? That it opens up a massive applicant pool for some of the positions that we're potentially looking to fill, which is great because I know lots of organizations have trouble filling some of those jobs and some of those positions. And then we have another organization. A friend of mine just said, you know what, my office actually, we've rented space in Markham for a long time, a whole office floor. They're a large sports apparel company. We've rented space on a floor in a large office building for a long time for the Canada division of this company. And we're not going back to work. We were just found out a couple weeks ago, we're not going back to work. There is going to be no more renting office space because it's an expense that the organization has been able to drop. And we know that, apparel and other sort of online, we know that retail hasn't done great during the pandemic, right? So they have been struggling a little bit. And so they said, you know what? This is an expense we don't need. Our staff don't need to be in the office. They're being very successful working from home. We're seeing great results from this. And so, you know what? This whole office, not going to go back to work. We're not going to rent out this space anymore. We're not going to do this, that, or the other. And they're looking at how, without cutting staff, which they need, they're able to cut massive monthly expenses. And so we're seeing that too as a trend, that I rent space. I don't need to if my staff are successful at home. That's a big advantage too. And there are lots of other reasons why this might be happening. But, as we go back to work, depending on how long we need to maintain social distancing guidelines, you might have to be cohorting staff and bringing people in and out. And you might say, to heck with all of that. I'm just going to have 30% of my staff stay home. There's no reason that they need to come to work. That's going to address a huge chunk of the potential issues with that part of our life moving forwards. And again, I might be able to downsize or do other things with that space. I might be able to create more collaborative work environments and do other creative things with maybe the space that I already own, which is kind of a cool environment or space to be in too. So there's lots of reasons why this is happening. But I think the message, from we're hearing from staff is that they want this, right? That they want this. This is a survey, some results from a survey conducted by an organization or a site called buffer.com. And it was a state of remote work report from 2020. So they interviewed polled 3,500 employees from all over the world. So these are not just North American employees, they're all over the world. But I thought these statistics kind of screamed at me, right? Like when you look at the first question, would you like to work remotely at least some of the time for the rest of your career? 98% of the 3,500 people polled said yes. 98%. That's a wild number, right? Like that number is crazy. I don't even care if after the pandemic you think, I don't want to work from home anymore. This was just too much for me. I still don't think that number is going to drop drastically. Let's say it gets down to 75 or 70%. That's still a huge chunk of our workforce that would like to work from home at least part-time. And so that's an interesting factor that we're bringing into the workplace is that our staff want to stay home, right? They're seeing some of the benefits, and those benefits are multifold, but I think not the least of which is that flexibility, right? And reduced commuting time. I know that, in my life, I work from home. That's what my life is like, but my husband traditionally has not. And so he has, for long, long periods of time, driven an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, depending on how bad traffic is, in order to get to or from work, and spends 3 hours plus a day commuting for 3 to 5 days a week, depending on how flexible his job has been. That's a lot of time in his life that he could get back. And a lot of employees are starting to realize that, right? I can be here for dinner. I can be home after school to pick up my kids, or, I can go to the gym at 4:00 in the afternoon, not 8:00 at night, because that's when I'm rolling in, eating dinner and then hitting that gym. There's a lot of benefits that people are seeing in the remote work world. And so our employers are ultimately responding to this in really strong ways. There are some struggles with working from home, right? It's not easy. And we've seen that over the last several months, right? It's not easy. There are some challenges. We're still navigating, I think, successful collaboration and interaction. We're doing better. But, at the beginning, I think we all struggled with that. How do I maintain connection to the workplace when I don't necessarily see my colleagues? And then there's that loss of social connection, because I do, in many cases, my colleagues in that past have been my friends and my social group, and you go out for a drink with them after work, or you grab dinner with them, or you have lunch and a walk. And those are things that aren't happening when you're working from home. So there is some potential for that loneliness to set in and that disconnect, but organizations are getting very creative with how we overcome some of these sessions, right? Some of these challenges and some of these drawbacks. So those are things that I think we need to be mindful of as we move forwards and try and plan for in our organization or scheduling. Not necessarily ergonomic in nature, but just interesting pieces that we need to be thinking about as we move forwards with this permanent remote work. When I said organizations are really embracing this, I want to highlight some that I did some research recently about what organizations are looking at remote work. And not only are the people here with me online today saying that you are looking at remote work, at least part-time or full-time, there are some very big organizations that are transitioning to some combination. So I'm going to read you off a few examples here that you probably will recognize. The first one here is Facebook, and 50%, they're saying that 50% of their workers will work remotely forever. Moving forwards, work remotely 100% of the time. We'll never see this face in the office ever. And the other 50% will come back to work as COVID protocols obviously are changed and impacted, but they may not even be back full time, right? They may come back to the office in part-time environments. So they're in the office 2 or 3 days a week, working from home 2 or 3 days a week. So that's an interesting example. Microsoft has said that employees can work from home 50% of their work week with the option for full remote work if the manager will approve it, right? If it's practical for the work they do and they're being successful at home, the manager could approve full-time work from home, which I thought was interesting. Salesforce, which is you may use Salesforce at your organization. It's a sort of relationship tracking tool that's been very popular and we see in a lot of different organizations. And they have sort of categorized their employees into 3 different groups. Number 1 is office-based staff. You must come to work. We need you here. It's sort of essential that you're on site, but that's very few people. They've identified that there's only a very small percentage of their workforce that fits into that category. The rest will either be fully remote or flex in the office 1 to 3 days a week, working from home 2 to 4 days a week or whatever that works out to be. Shopify, another online type business, has said 100% working from home forever. Siemens, not an online type environment, has said 140,000 of their employees will work from home 2 to 3 days a week moving forwards. Right. So these are some organizations with more brick and mortar type environments and physical office space that don't operate in the cloud type environment. And even they are saying that this is possible, and they are looking at significant chunks or large numbers of their staff going back. Right. And like I said, our clients are moving this way too. You're telling me you're moving this way too, with the numbers of folks who are saying at least part-time online, or at least part-time working from home. So this is the wave of the future. And I would even say it's not the wave of the future, it's the wave of the nail. This is where we're at, right? People are moving and working from home currently, and we're trying to transition this from a temporary environment to something that is more permanent. So there's a lot of talk happening associated with that. So I want to talk about that piece, is that transition piece. How do we sort of make this transition successful from this temporary space to the permanent space? Because that is one of the challenges that we're seeing at the moment. Okay. So let me just, sorry, I got some notes here. I want to make sure I can see all the details here. So I wanted to start here by saying, okay, we've done some of the intro pieces, and I know that's part of the work that we do and with the conversation we need to have to sort of set the stage for the rest of our chat. But I've led off our three-part webinar series with self-assessment, right? That's sort of the one I picked. I could have chosen anything. I could have started with equipment. I could have started with training, but I picked self-assessment, and it's not a mistake. I picked it, and I've got a big why to go along with it. So I wanted to share some of the information as to why I've chosen self-assessment to launch this three-part series. Since March, we have been hosting a temporary work from home webinar. So we have saying, okay, you guys are working from home. We realize that most of you are going back to work. And so in this case, we will educate staff on how to set up their environment at home using temporary work from home solutions. So we talk to people about adjusting a kitchen chair in order to fit them better, that they can sit on a cushion, for example, or tuck a pillow or a towel behind their back in order to create lumbar support in your chair, and basically use at-home solutions to create ergonomic fit in your workstation, right? And increase comfort or manage discomfort if we've been experiencing that. And my why really is stemming from the next part here, which is that during that webinar, we've been polling staff, just like we polled you this morning, right? I asked you the question about how many of you are looking at work from home. We are polling staff, and we are asking questions about their setup as a means to basically give guidance throughout the webinar. So I need to know, is your monitor at the right height? And if it's not, here's what I would recommend that you do. For those of you in this category, this is the action item. For those of you in this category, this is the action item, right? So the polling has a purpose throughout that webinar to provide guidance and education and solutions to the potential challenges they're experiencing. But I thought it was really interesting. There's a couple pieces that I've pulled out from those polls that I wanted to share with you today, because this is my why. And it's really that our clients don't know what the setup is like at home, right? Because we have significant numbers of people sitting in awkward postures and awkward positions. So my first why is one of the questions that we ask. And when at this point, when I ran these statistics, we were talking about over 1,500 staff have gone through and answered this question in one of the webinars. So the actual number is 1,553 people that have attended this webinar and answered this question. Basically said the question is your monitor in line with your eye height, above your eye height, or below your eye height, or some similar question to that. And of those 1,500 plus people, 50% of them reported that the monitor was either too high or too low. So 750 odd people told us that their monitor was not at the right height. And we know that poor monitor positioning can lead to discomfort of your neck, your upper back, your lower back. You could even argue potentially your shoulders, depending on how that neck discomfort translates throughout your body. You can even start to experiencing numbing and tingling in your hands, which is really driven by issues related to your neck, right? So we know that prolonged exposure to poor monitor setup, looking up or looking down for a long period of time, can lead to all kinds of aches, pains, and discomforts at the workstation. And 50% of those 1,500 plus people who have attended our webinar were in the wrong position, right? So and the employer didn't know. right? That's the key piece here, is that our employers that we're working with had not likely, or some of them maybe had in some capacity, but a lot of them had not gone through any kind of self-assessment tool because it was temporary. Everything sort of happened so fast and so quickly. Nobody was ready for it. We were dealing with literally the logistics. I have clients who went out and bought 200 laptops the day that, after March break, when everybody announced that the world was ending, like the world was closing, all businesses were going to be closed. We had employers with desktops everywhere and went out and bought hundreds of laptops. Like the logistics was the number one priority. How do we physically make this happen? And then we never quite got to this next step, which is evaluating those workstation setups to make sure we were warding off or preventing any of these injuries. And that's probably our biggest challenges, right? And it's been temporary. So we keep treating it like, oh, we're going back to work eventually. It's not going to be that long. But as it rolls on and rolls on and rolls on, it obviously is getting longer and longer and longer. And certainly a year of time spent looking up or looking down is plenty of time to have experienced an injury related to monitor height, right? So we've been missing that gap because we've been treating it as temporary, and it has been, but it's not going to be temporary forever for a lot of our staff. So we need to be doing a better job of assessing. The other why for me is the same kinds of question. We talk about what working height you should be at. So what height should you type and mouse at? And the answer is elbow height, right? The answer is that you should type and mouse at elbow height when your shoulders are relaxed, when your upper arm is vertical, your keyboard and mouse should be at elbow height. So if you're not there now, this is a good time to try and fiddle and see if you can make it happen. That's your tip for the day, your ergo tip for comfort. But again, 1,553 people responded, right? So a significant number of staff have responded to this question over time, and 64% said that they were either working too high, their keyboard and mouse were too high, or too low, right? So that they were not at elbow height. And so that means that at least 64% of our staff were working in a position that could potentially cause discomfort to our shoulders, our neck, our upper back, our elbows, and our wrists. Basically, our upper extremity and anything that supports the weight of our arm, like our neck and upper back musculature. Right. So that's a lot of people, right? That's even more than our monitor positioning. And I would say that working at elbow height is one of the key factors for ergonomic setup in the CSA standard for comfort and proper fit of a workstation. And so a huge chunk of our staff were not working at the right height. And that's a scary number, right? And it's sort of even scarier to me that maybe we didn't know that, right? We had a sense or an inkling that something wasn't great. We were having some reports of some discomfort, but we had no sense that 60% of our staff were struggling with finding the right working height, right? And that's where we need to move away from this idea that this is temporary. We need to know that number. I need to know that my staff are A, not at elbow height, if that's what the situation is, and B, have strategies in place in order to make that better for them so that they are not working in the inappropriate height that they've been able to achieve fit at their workstation. And these two questions are not necessarily independent. So somebody may have said that their working height was too high and their monitor height was too low, for example. It's possible that those two things, they answered yes, or that both questions were incorrect, right? That they weren't in the right setup for both questions. So you have at least 64% of your people had one, maybe two, and it's probably, I couldn't run those numbers based on the way the data is presented to me, but I was curious to know how many staff had at least one issue. That's not something I may spend some time diving into to figure out if I can come up with an answer to that question, but it'll require a lot of manipulation of my data. But I'm very intrigued by that question. Is it 75%? Is it 80%? Is it 85% of the people who are attending our webinars who are telling us that at least one piece of setup is not ideal? Right? Those are numbers that are scary. And that's why, for me, the self-assessment was the why. That's why I wanted to pick this first. Is my why for this is that there's a lot of people out there working in poor posture, and we need to be assessing, evaluating those pieces to make sure that when we send them home for permanent remote work, where they are not going to be back in the office or going to be working from home at least 2 or 3 days a week, that we have the setup correct so that we're warding off any of those potential issues to our upper back, neck, shoulders, etc., so that we're not likely to have an injury at home. Because we all know as employers that we have a health and safety responsibility for our employees. And that responsibility does not end when they walk out of the office and start remote work, right? That we are still responsible for what is happening, injuries that are occurring in our home offices. So this can create a problem if we haven't done a good job of assessing or evaluating the risk that's present in our workplace, which now has extended to this home office. Then we're not evaluating the risk to a huge chunk of our workers. When you look at folks like Keith, who's suggesting that somewhere in the ballpark of 40 to 50% of his staff will be at least part-time at home. Right. So if we don't evaluate their workstations at home in some way, then we are missing out on that risk assessment, which we know is key to all health and safety, our responsibility in the internal responsibility system for health and safety. Right. So I think we can argue that from a temporary perspective, we've done the best that we can and we've been managing it sort of on the fly, dealing with it as we are able. But that same argument doesn't hold up when we move to permanent remote work. When we get to permanent remote work, now we need to be talking about how do we make sure that we have assessed and evaluated, trained, educated all the pieces of our webinars over the next several months, right? Provided the right equipment. How do we get all those pieces working together so that we can have successful setup at home and less likely or reduced likelihood of injuries or discomfort in the home office? And that's going to be the key of sort of the next messaging over the next 3 webinars, or all 3 of our webinars, is how do we successfully do this? Because this is a big problem if we're not doing a good job of it. We have a lot of workers not in the office, not managing their risk, and that potentially opens us up to all kinds of increases in injury, and we don't want that for sure. All right, so let's talk about the self-assessment. Sort of what is this going to look like? So I've tried to capture this as a couple different whys, or excuse me, W questions, right? Yeah, I'm going to talk about the W's today. The one thing I want to sort of start with is that I recommend that every organization begins with self-assessment, right? Further assessment down the road by someone who is a trained professional, if somebody is really struggling, having someone like myself come in or do a virtual ergonomic assessment of a home office, all of those things are possible, but not essential, right? You don't have to go there. If somebody is having no discomfort, is successfully able to set up their workstation to fit their body size and shape, then there's really no reason you have to go beyond the self-assessment. So rather than say, you know what, everybody who's working from home is going to have a virtual assessment with an ergonomist or with a member of our health and safety team or our ergonomic specialist on staff, we are going to start with a self-assessment of that workstation. And then from there, depending on what we find in that self-assessment, we may take some additional steps in order to, progress through and make sure that they are set up correctly. So good news here is that I'm recommending self-assessment, not that you go and visit every one of your employees' home offices, right? That is not what assessment needs to look like. Certainly a self-assessment tool, a well-designed self-assessment tool can address a huge chunk of the potential issues with your remote work staff without ever actually physically having to go see their site or conduct a more in-depth assessment, which is great news. And that would be the case in the office as well, right? A lot of staff can do just fine if they get some education. They're able to make some good adjustments. They're able to, get their keyboard tray to the right height. And so therefore their body size and shape is a good match or a fit to their workstation. They don't ever need a formal assessment of any kind. Right? Same rules apply here. So self-assessment is key, I think, as a first step in evaluating the risk that's present in the home office. All right, so when should this self-assessment occur? And I wanted to highlight here that there's a couple different stages, I think. Number one, I think you need to think about self-assessment before our approval from work from home is given, right? That this one's a bit of a stickier one. I know that temporary situations and people are working from home right now, so that might throw a wrench in the plans here. But if you are talking about new hires, bringing new staff on, before approval is given for them to start working at home, we should be doing the self-assessment then. Right? Because we could start someone in a work environment at home, give them approval to go home and start working, and then find out a month later when we go through the self-assessment, they've actually spent a month in really terrible posture because they didn't have this equipment or they didn't have this set up correctly or this was poorly adjusted or, right? There could be lots of things happening. So before we give approval, ideally, we should be doing our self-assessment at that point, right? Which also means that it has to be after all the equipment is present. So if somebody wants to work from home, whatever strategy you have in place as to what that looks like, which is the topic of next month's webinar, then we will then do a self-assessment to ensure that the workstation equipment provided is set up correctly. And then obviously work can begin after that. So I think it needs to be happening before the actual work from home begins, but after equipment is provided or purchased by the employee, depending on which route you go. Right. So kind of a sweet spot there where I think that self-assessment needs to occur. And ultimately, people aren't approved to work from home until they have achieved the ergonomic setup or fit that you are looking for, or set out as your criteria at your workplace. I also think self-assessment is probably not a one-time thing, right? Like any risk assessment you would do for a workplace, you would do you wouldn't do it once and then ignore it for 10 years and not do it again, because risk changes, environments change, people move, for example, people change spaces, they get a new piece of equipment, like things change, right? That's normal. They make some adjustments, they fiddle around with stuff. And so things change. And so as a result, I also think a self-assessment is a regular ongoing tool that's in your back pocket, right? That we should be having staff complete some sort of refresher, maybe training. We should have them complete that self-assessment again to ensure that our questions still say, yes, we are set up correctly in all these boxes, right? I can check all these boxes off. So I think it's an annual basis is sort of probably the gold standard, at the very minimum every 2 years. I don't even know if that's biannual. I may have gotten that wrong, but every 2 years at minimum. But I think you're better off to say every year. Annually, you're going to have to complete the self-assessment. We'll review it. And if there's anything further we need to be doing, we can tackle it then. It can also be a good way to get staff to communicate if you include some questions about any discomforts they might be having. If they divulge that information in your self-assessment tool, that's a great opportunity to grab onto that, figure out what's going on with their workstation, and use that as an early indicator. So, right, they're having stage 1 of our discomfort. And so it's a great chance to jump in, make a quick change, get them a new piece of equipment or a new setup change, and all of a sudden their discomfort's gone and you've never really had a true reportable injury, right? You just had some minor discomfort that we've been able to manage very quickly and easily. Right, so I think there's a sweet spot as to when we're doing our self-assessment. The who, I think, fairly straightforward. It's a self-assessment. So your employee is obviously doing that self-assessment themselves. But I think the secondary piece is also important, right? Self-assessment is not done just for the sake of self-assessment. We need to be able to take action from our whatever we find in that self-assessment, right? If there are deficiencies within that workstation setup, we need to be, as an employer, identifying those and working to make change, either through education or equipment changes or whatever else might be needed. And so in this case, there needs to be a reviewer, right? Your employee completes the self-assessment tool. Who is going to review that data? Who's going to give you that information, review that information, and ensure that this employee has been able to set themselves up correctly? Depending on the organization, this question could be a whole host of different people. We see a lot that it may fall to the manager, right, as part of their, launching a remote work program, connecting with their employees. One of their first meetings would potentially be reviewing the self-assessment. And obviously, I think in that case, then maybe your manager needs some education about what to look for and what sort of concerns to be having. And then they may have a next step, right? If we identify something that we cannot fix or address in our initial meeting, our self-assessment meeting, then that goes up the chain to the health and safety person or HR or your health nurse or whoever that might be. These self-assessment reviews could also be completed by any of those people, right? Your health and safety team could take that on if you're large enough. If you're in the health and safety team, you probably wear 50 hats already and don't have time to add self-assessment for hundreds of employees to it. But it is a possibility or an option that, it could fall to someone like that. It could fall to HR. It could fall to your health nurse. It could even be managed by someone like us, an external company that you hire in because you have hundreds of employees and you can't possibly feel like you have time to manage all of that. I mean, that's always an option, right? To look for external help to manage that program. But the important part is that we're managing the health and safety of our workers at home. And really one of their main issues is going to be ergonomic setup, right? There's going to be lots of other things that disappear when you work from home from a safety perspective, but ergonomics is not one of them. And so we need to make sure that we're doing our self-assessment and evaluating that properly. All right, so there is a standard on CSA standard on office ergonomics, and I wanted just to highlight that because what we're really reviewing our self-assessment tool for is compliance, and that's sort of an interesting concept, right? Is that we want to comply with proper ergonomic setup principles so that our staff are unlikely to get injured. And so I think the solutions to how we do that at home obviously are a little bit more customized because everybody's desk might be different depending on whether you provide them as the workplace or not. But everybody's desk might be different, everybody's chair might be different, everybody's keyboard might be different. So there's a lot more, everybody literally where they work might be different. They might work at a kitchen table, they might work at a desk in the basement, or they might have a private office that they're able to shut the door on. There's lots of situations, all of which could be appropriate from a setup perspective, provided they can meet the criteria required. And so we're really reviewing for compliance with that CSA standard. Are people set up properly? And then if they're not, our next step is to look at making some adjustments or some change, right? We need to take action. So I want to stop here for 1 second and just say people get scared, right? I just threw up 6 different examples of equipment on the slide. And I think as soon as I was doing it, I thought, I need to just say this out loud once, that it isn't necessarily the solution, or the take action element here is not necessarily new equipment. In many cases, the equipment that somebody has is totally adequate. They just don't know how to use it properly, right? Or they haven't got it set up correctly. Or I'm talking about equipment that is $15, right? Or $20 or $40. And those are much more reasonable price points, right? Yes, sometimes I'm talking about a chair and sometimes I'm talking about a sit stand, and those have, $1,000 price points. And I get that. But just as frequently, I'm talking about a footrest for 50 to 80 bucks. I'm talking about a laptop stand or a monitor stand for 20 bucks. I'm talking about a new mouse for 40, right? Like just as frequently, I'm talking about those pieces as well. So equipment is not always necessary. And that's why our third part of our webinar series is focused on talking about the equipment that's necessary, but then B, why the education piece is so important, because we don't always need to get somebody some cool newfangled gadget that costs hundreds of dollars. In many cases, education about how to get the right setup at your workstation would be totally sufficient. So we're going to dedicate a whole webinar to the equipment needs that you might have. And then we're going to dedicate a whole other webinar to education and training. And then to go along with that, I've got some slide at the end here today, but I just want to plug it here for a second that to go along with this 3-part webinar series, we have another big launch that's happening, and you've maybe seen it in our newsletter just lately, and we are very excited to have a new product coming. It's so close to being ready. I cannot wait to share it. It's super exciting for us. So I've got, stay tuned for today, because I've got a little note about it at the end of the webinar, and in the future webinars, we'll be talking about bits and pieces of it as well to sort of highlight how we can help you with all of these pieces. We can help you with self-assessment. We can help you with training. Maybe I can't help you as much with equipment, but I can guide you through what options you should be looking at and considering. But ultimately, our new product launch aligns both the self-assessment and the education pieces together, right? So building those two pieces together so people can do that take action step, that no equipment piece, because they've identified that their monitor is too low. Well, the take action piece in that case, the education might say, put something under your monitor, get a paper ream, get a textbook, get a little box that you can stick under there. Or you need to raise it to this height. Were you able to achieve that successfully? Yes. Fabulous. Moving forwards. And so we are providing sort of a combination of some of that education with this self-assessment checklist and self-assessment tool. So takes the guesswork out of ergonomics, hopefully, for work from home staff. And we want all of you to have the first sneak peek. So that's coming in the very near future. And we're super excited to launch that. Just a little plug for something that's new and exciting in our world that we can't wait to share with all of you. So just remember, take action does not always mean buy a whole bunch of new equipment. But sometimes it does mean that, right? Sometimes we have to accommodate someone. Sometimes somebody's got discomfort or injury, just like they're in the office. We've done an assessment. We've determined that they need a special kind of mouse, or they need a special kind of keyboard, or something else altogether to address their specific discomfort, because it is now an injury that we are working to accommodate. And obviously that's sort of a secondary piece to this. We're talking about, in a lot of cases, trying to manage the general population before we ever get there, right? Most of our staff can be accommodated with equipment and education that are sort of standardized. And then there'll be a few folks that are struggling with something just as if they were in the office. And then we need to jump into that accommodation. And we might be looking for something more custom in those situations, and something, more custom equipment. Okay. So what does that self-assessment checklist look like? First of all, I think it's a checklist, right? I think it should be a very simple, straightforward checklist, a yes, no type of situation. We want staff to be able to answer the questions quickly and easily. And it should review all components of the workstation that you train on, hopefully, right? We're educating on, we've trained them on how to set it up. So we're asking questions within that training or independent from that training to make sure that they've been able to achieve all the criteria that we have mapped out, right? So we want to review all those areas. So we want to make sure that they're working at the right height, that they've got their chair set up correctly, that they have a keyboard and mouse, and that it is at their elbow height. What is their monitor positioning? You can even talk about accessories. What are your mouse, not your mouse so much, but your document holder or your telephone stand or your webcam or whatever else that you might need. We can talk about accessories there too, but it should go through all of those key criteria that you would find in the CSA standard. We're basically evaluating this as if it's an extension of the workplace. We need to make sure it meets all of those criteria. Like I said, simple questions are key here. So yes, no, or maybe even a couple multiple choice. But you want to digest that information really quick. You want somebody to be able to complete the assessment fairly quickly. And you want your manager or whoever is going to be doing the reviewing to not be reading mounds and mounds and mounds of documents. Not such a big deal if there's 10 people in your organization, but a lot of folks are talking about hundreds to thousands of folks that they are going to be moving to temporary or permanent remote work. And in those cases, not temporary, all permanent, but permanent full-time or permanent part-time remote work, excuse me. And so in that case, they need to be able to wade through that information and quickly red flag any issues, right? That they've been able to identify that so-and-so is not working at elbow height and they were not able to address that. So that person needs a follow-up, right? That's sort of the flow chart, is that these aren't a match. They need a follow-up to review the next action steps for that piece or deficiency at their workstation. I would encourage you to use an online tool or form in order to complete this. The self-assessment checklist on paper obviously gets a bit onerous. We have to, first of all, your staff are going to be at home and you're going to be at work or at your home, and trying to send paper around is not very practical. But an online form also is going to give you all kinds of additional data power that you don't have with an online or with a physical paper form, right? So doing this online, getting data inputted and being able to run an assessment and say, okay, I have 40 people in my department that I need to review their workstation setup. I'm going to prioritize anyone who answered no to 2 or more questions, right? They weren't successfully able to work at elbow height and they weren't successfully able to, or they don't have a mouse yet, right? Those are the 2 things. Those are examples of 2 things that they maybe have answered no to. And so in that case, we want to prioritize those people, grab them together and make sure that we're, checking in with them first, because there are potential for injury. Everybody else who's managed to check yes to everything probably gets a touch in, right? I think they should have a touch base. Hey, how's everything going? What's the workstation setup feeling like? Let's just make sure that everything's feeling good. You want to be able to see it, obviously, so that you can get a sense of that. But you can probably do that in 5 minutes at the start of another meeting, whereas someone who's got some deficiency obviously needs more time. So I think data is key here, and how you organize and manage that data so that you can prioritize who gets seen and what changes need to be made and how many issues we're experiencing. And then you can move forwards from there. One of the questions here is, can we access this self-assessment checklist? Yes, we have this. This is one we've created and we've been made available. So we're happy to send that out to folks today as well. If you want to see some of the examples of the types of questions you could ask, and they're not by any means exhaustive. You can switch it up and it depends maybe on what equipment you've provided. For example, the one that's sampled here in this picture is for at-home setup. So, and temporary at-home setup has been the focus. So there'll be some solutions there that perhaps aren't appropriate for permanent work, right? I don't want people sitting on cushions as their permanent work option. That's not really appropriate, right? They need an appropriate chair that fits them properly. And so some of the solutions you see in the temporary list may not be appropriate for the moving forwards, but I'm happy to share what we've got at this point. Hopefully it's more linear than my little diagram there to have that little person sort of navigating some of the improvement suggestions, right? Working your way through that. But hopefully it's more linear than that. But ergonomic issues at the computer generally have standardized solutions, right? It's not necessary. Sometimes it's outside the box thinking, especially when it's complex discomfort, but in a lot of cases, it's not. In a lot of cases, I need someone to get to elbow height, and you achieve that in one of 3 ways, for example, right? So you can use that as part of your education and your solution process. If your self-assessment provides guidance on how to fix those issues. So that's sort of part 2 of the self-assessment checklist, is that I think it can also help you minimize how many people you need to follow up with and do a good job of basically doing that assessment up front. And so in this case, I would say, okay, question number 1 is your keyboard and at elbow height? Yes or no, right? And then my secondary question would be, if above elbow height, raise your chair, or not a secondary question, my solution. If above your elbow height, raise your chair to align your keyboard and mouse with elbow height. If it's below elbow height, lower your chair or raise the work surface to align yourself with keyboard with elbow height. And then the final question would be, were you successfully able, after these solutions, to align your keyboard and mouse with elbow height, right? And so that's how we take a basic self-assessment tool, and now we're providing some recommendations and guidance as to how they might be able to make change at their workstation and improve their workstation setup. And so that hopefully would eliminate some of those folks that have said, is my keyboard at elbow height? Well, no, it's not. Okay, try these things. Now is it at elbow height? Oh yeah, now it is. Fabulous. Self-assessment, education complete. We probably don't need to revisit this in great detail, besides to do a basic check-in, right? So that's really handy if your self-assessment tool can also provide guidance on typical solutions we would see to some of the workplace challenges that people are experiencing. Another example of that might be, do you have 2 screens? Do you use 2 screens at your workstation? Yes, no. Obviously, if it's yes, we dive into some more questions. If it's yes, is your primary screen, the one you use most often, directly in front of you? Yes or no? Okay, if you answered yes to that sub-question, then great, you're done. If not, can you relocate your monitor to directly in front of your seated position and move the secondary screen or laptop to the side and angle it towards you? And then same thing, final follow-up, were you able to successfully set up your 2 screens in the recommended position? In a dream world, this would also include some pictures or diagrams as to what that might look like. And again, if it's an online tool, I think you get a lot more options as to how to build in some of these sub-questions and include pictures of what you're looking for. It can get quite cool and be a good way of, again, gathering data and figuring out did first question, okay, no, we weren't set up correctly, but by the time you tried some of these solutions that we're providing, yes, you were successfully able to wrap up your workstation, and it will significantly minimize how much time you need to spend following up with staff, right? Because they should, in theory, be able to, a lot of them, be able to make those adjustments to address the issues at their workstation. So it can be a really cool option. All right. So that is sort of a wrap up as for what I envision for today's plan to look like and talk about self-assessment. I want to save a few minutes for questions here at the end, but I did want to just once more highlight that exciting new launch and product that we have coming for you if you are interested in learning more and getting access. So I promise we have something new and exciting happening, and you are actually the very first people I've ever talked about it with. Aside from internally with my colleagues, I have never talked to anybody at any organization about it yet. This is a very first peek at what is coming. So we are very excited to be putting that finishing touches on our first ever module in our brand new Pro Ergonomics online learning system. And so our expectation is that we will slowly build up some online ergonomics education modules that you can have staff log into and go through, get some good data management and information about what's happening on the back end. This one just happens to be perfectly aligned with the main issues that workplaces are experiencing right now, trying to figure out how to transition to permanent remote work and home office ergonomics. So it's meant for permanent remote workers. It's going to talk about things like chairs, desks, keyboard, mice, monitor, all the sort of key components of a computer workstation. And it's what does exactly what I just talked about, right? It combines the built-in self-assessment, right? You go through section on the chair, then you get asked questions, a series of questions about your chair setup, and provides recommendations on how you can manage some of those issues. And then ultimately, hopefully, you're able to answer, yes, I'm set up correctly to all of the questions that are available to me, right? So hopefully that built-in self-assessment tool allows you as a health and safety or HR professional to sit back, relax, and let us manage your work from home ergonomics program to whatever level you need. We can provide you with the data, we can analyze it, we can conduct assessments as follow-up, we can be as heavily involved or as little as you need, but ultimately it's going to give you that self-assessment compared with some of this education that we'll be talking about. So we are getting ready to finalize and launch that product very soon. And we had a link on our most recent newsletter for you to get on the first peek to access some exciting entry-level pricing. So we'll have some entry-level pricing for anybody who gets on board at the beginning, and there'll be some giveaways that go along with anybody who signs up to get more information as well. So that link is available in our newsletter. I will send it out this afternoon as I send out the recording for this webinar as well. And then certainly you'll get it as I close out the webinar today. I will also share that as well there. So there's all kinds of opportunities to get in on that entry-level pricing and some great giveaways on this new product we're launching and are very excited about. We don't get to launch new products in ergonomics very often, so this has been a pretty exciting adventure for us. So I see a couple questions over here, so I want to address those before the time runs out today. If you have any additional questions, now's a great time to type them in the chat box, the question box, and I will happily answer them now. So logistical questions, I think. Number one, is there a recording? Yes, I'm recording today's webinar, and I will post it on our YouTube page, and I will share that link this afternoon via email. So that will go out by email, as well as a link to this page, so you can get that sneak peek, first look at our new product once it launches, and you sort of explore what that looks like and feels like, and see if it would work or be a good fit for your organization if you're looking at permanent remote work. And then I had some questions, again, logistical here about where can we assess this, get the self-assessment checklist? Do I have a permanent remote work checklist as well? At this moment, I don't have a permanent remote work checklist. It will be part of the program that we're launching. So that will be available through the program. I don't have one currently finalized at the moment, but I'm happy to share the temporary remote work one that we have at the moment. So I'll include that in the email this afternoon to all attendees. Okay, another question here is curious about the management part of the new program. What kinds of information will we get? Oh, good question. And these are things that we're finalizing right now, actually, just trying to figure out what makes sense. And if you have some suggestions about what you would want to know, that would be great, because the more information we have from clients and potential users, the better the end product will be. So right now, we ask several questions throughout the webinar or throughout the module about workstation setup, and provide the self-check, and then hopefully people are making adjustments, and then do sort of a formal self-assessment piece as we go along. And so we can give you information right now about all of those. So any question that somebody asks, we can let you know if they're set up correctly, if they're not set up correctly. And then our current plan is to provide you with sort of the management piece, that here's the list of people that have gone through the webinar, the online module this month. And here is what the findings were from their answers to their questions. So here are the top 10 people that we think you need to follow up with or do a deeper dive on to make sure that their workstation is set up correctly. And here are the people who had no issues identified in the self-assessment tool at all. And then everybody got the education. So you sort of check the education box and the self-assessment box all at the same time. And hopefully all of that management piece is what you're looking for. But if you're looking for something slightly different, that would be great information for us to have right now. So please feel free to share any tips things that you would like to see or like to know more about. Ooh, okay. Question is about temporary to permanent. So I'm talking about self-assessment, and I said we should do it before people work from home. However, the problem is that people have been working from home. And so what we're talking about now is that we're trying to transition people from temporary to permanent remote work. And so in that case, I think you do your self-assessment as soon as permanent remote work becomes an option, or now, like getting ready for permanent remote work. But as soon as you know that staff will be working permanently from home, it no longer is a temporary situation. We need to start figuring out how we're making sure people are set up correctly at home. And so if we're transitioning from temporary to permanent, we do our self-assessment and we start to address any deficiencies that we've had over the past several months now. And then we can move into the next phase and whatever changes need to happen to make it more permanent. But awesome. I have 11 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of your time. I'm getting some messages which indicate to me that people are having to jet off to other meetings. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really am excited to share some great information, hopefully, about self-assessment. And please join us for our webinars in the next coming months, so you make sure you get the whole complete package about self-assessment today, equipment next month, and then talking about training and education for your remote workers in month 3. So Thank you, everybody. I had a fabulous day today. I hope that you gain a lot of tips and tricks and things to think about. So have a great afternoon. And I'm still here. If you have questions, if you want to type one in, I'm not going to run away on you. I'm happy to continue answering questions. But for those of you running off, thank you so much. And I hope you have a fabulous afternoon. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. I'm getting lots of thank yous. Good information. I hope you found it useful. There's lots to talk about with remote work being permanent and the changes that are necessitated. So hopefully you can digest some of this and get ready for equipment discussion in next month. All right. Thanks, everybody.